Welcome to YouTube Masterclass Coursera. This is the re-lecture of week 6. We had to postpone the original one due to some errors in the soundtrack, and I apologize because sometimes I use loud soundtracks in Masterclass, but I can't always tell what booklets I have copyrighted for music or whatever. I've tried to report to myself what all I can use is music, and sometimes even the most mainstream music is allowed by certain aspects of my YouTube creator's design. That even my rock and roll soundtracks to shows like Two Badass Businesses, which I wrote and directed with Ashley and Amanda Sheley, and there's also a movie or 10 that I directed with them in on the auspice that it was part of the show, which it was as well, which I have lots of connected pieces to bigger shows that come off as standalone products within the midst of it is great, but what I'm getting at is that like these long shows and these things we have are demarcated with this underscore of rock music that we could sometimes even trudge out of it. And the last time I did a master class that you didn't see, there was actually some music that wasn't on my copyright booklet, and that's one of the things, you can keep track of what you can use, but if you're suddenly confused by what you can't use, and this is a how-to tip for doing YouTube videos, just ace the video out and do it over. I mean, just my explanation right now is making it so exciting that we're on groundbreaking medium and that we can put things up to YouTube Masterclass when they allow us to, and that like I got trained in Masterclass and course, and YouTube creators were asking me to come to Masterclass when I got my PhD, and I got my PhD, and then before that I got the Pulitzer Prize, and it was like one of those moments that like at least I didn't have to go through with those ace in the hole, guys, the guy stuck in the cave and Kirk Douglas is going to break him out, and it's Elia Kazan in the movie Ace in the Hole. Is Elia Kazan directed it, and it's kind of cynical and it's kind of modern. The guy gets trapped in a hole, and they ask him to stay in the hole one day longer, which ends up killing him, but they ask him to stay there so the newspaper can get there so he can print the story that's going to win the Pulitzer Prize. Now, that's not how I got mine. And then there's this movie called Shock Corridor where this guy goes to, we talked about this a little in Masterclass 1. It's a Samuel Fuller movie, and God bless Samuel Fuller, What a great guy. I mean, his distrust of communism probably roots back to the Blacklist and his love for Disney, but hang on. Samuel Fuller got really famous off a movie he made called Shock Corridor, and that Shock Corridor is about a guy who wants to write another Pulitzer Prize winning story, so he goes to a mental hospital to solve a crime, which it's uncertain what is a crime and what isn't, because some crimes break out anyway at the hospital that are way more traumatic even than the crime he's going after, and that he goes totally insane. And in neither movie is the Pulitzer Prize won. You think, don't go after that. That's the movie sign that movie guys can't get it. Movie guys are different than press guys, But then I remind you, and I didn't get a cinema one. Now, mine was an online one. It was kind of special. See, and I thanked everybody for that. But there are other online things. But if you look at the magnitude of all these materials we've put out, we can always prove with our quality that we made it in there. We're not really the great Hollywood Pulitzer that was supposedly indefinable and not seekable by anyone in any medium, and that they were too impossible to get. But I'll tell you, in my case, while it was too impossible to get, the only real trial I had was that 3 months out from when they said they'd give it to me, they said I had to revise my book one last time since it was online and get all the mistakes out. They said they wouldn't take it if it had mistakes. And they said that my version didn't have that many mistakes, but they didn't want any, and so they were giving me 3 months to get the Pulitzer, and that I turned it in about 3 days later with no mistakes, is to my credit. But I'm not trying to brag about myself, because like really I'm a good director, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about modernism, and that I'm a postmodernist doesn't make me the greatest director, though I do direct for the cinema for the sake of cinema, and many of you have seen Two Badass Businesses that I've directed, and seen Orgy of the Damned that I've directed. And there are other movies that I made too that were interesting, like Bipolar and Quarantine and Mountain Music and Oracles and all those rock videos. And they're all connected with studios. It's really cool. And the studios have reigned over them and sheltered us so much in our storms of making cinema work out. And I don't even think that stemmed off the Pulitzer. It's just one of those things that you catch it all. You go to a school like CalArts and you finally achieve the moon and get everything together, and then you're in a master class, which even more solidifies your CalArts PhD, and that you can do that at this level is really, I owe it all to CalArts, because they kind of told me to kind of resituate myself in Colorado, catch up on the homework, which they didn't tell me was 7,000 page long homework. But if I would have known, I would have done it anyway, and that like I can handle mass amounts of writing. Though I'm not saying everything I write is good. Well, everything I write's pretty much as good as some of the Pulitzer stuff. Some of it's better. I got to put in one more shameless plug for myself. This is MasterClass, YouTube MasterClass, COURSERA, Harvard, USC, CalArts. And I just put out a book called Genji the Summoner. And one person I wanted to thank that I didn't really thank in the text, but who's thanked me in so many books, is Matt Klickstein. And Matt Klickstein is a partner of mine that I worked with on one of my very first directing of a feature, which was my very first feature, and it was Rut. That I did another movie for Aspen called Oedipus Marshall, was that I wrote and acted in it. But I actually, that same year, a little while after, Matt Klickstein from USC Film School gets a hold of me. You know, the guy that wrote the Nickelodeon book or the Comic-Con book that are all famous? He's a real famous writer, and he's real good. And he came to my side to make a movie, and we made like this movie called Rut, and it's like this silent film. And I don't mean to be attracting to myself, but that Matt Klickstein was one to thank, even though he is not that into like Eastern culture things. He is, but he isn't. Like, he doesn't really study it, not because just because it's not something that's up his alley, but that I still had story structure from Western America putting together this book on Japan. He's not going to be offended that the book's about Japan, in the fact that he's going to love that it's written in American style, and that I'm thanking him for helping me with the true American style. Is one thing I've got to hand it to Matt Klickstein. He's really been focused on American bands and American trials and American movies. You know, he's big into that. That he goes for other things too is cool, but that he's enamored by Italian cinema, you know, too. But he's enamored by things like the French New Wave. He just can't, it's like he can't take his eyes off the French New Wave, but that he's all-American in his work is something interesting to me, because even in my flotation device of Japan, I've never been to Japan, they're always telling you, write what you know, and this is what I know about history that can be written, and yet it's entertaining because you have like this kind of scenography of the anime version of a comic book as to how Japanese cinema takes place. So there's this whole work that I've been working on, and I feel a lot less burdened now and can replace episodes of MasterClass if they need it. And to be honest, there were a few episodes last semester, that were making it difficult because I couldn't get beyond that episode, not just because I wanted a soundtrack for it, which I'll have to apologize for no soundtrack tonight. You know, the KMSA feed is there, but the KMSA feed has gotten us into some copyright things that we don't want right now. So I'm going to look for another soundtrack for next time, but we're not even on to the first movie. I just had to give you a quick introduction of myself. Oh, I guess I do have to brag about one more thing. Aaron Sheley, Dr. Sheley, takes the world record of most poetry of all time. Now, this sounds like total bullshit, but check this out. For 10 years, the last decade, I spent day and night writing poetry, and then I alienated relationships with everyone I know, and didn't have any social life, and barely got my band going when I was still doing poetry for 10 years, and that was 5 years after I'd been totally isolated from the world and just like living with my friends and family and just doing nothing but this nonstop poetry, and everybody's getting annoyed. There are years that go on and they're all waiting for the book to finish, and they think I'm all doing nothing but being obsessed with poetry. And this is a true story, because it isn't like, from a guy who said he was into filmmaking, you wouldn't always expect poetry, although Pasolini, Italian neorealist and Italian formalist as it is, wrote poetry too, and his poetry is way better than mine, and he didn't write thousands of thousands, but who's to say he could have? You know, I don't know how many poems Pasolini made, but it seemed like it was in the 450 range, and that I did actually research that at CALARTS years ago, and that there were a lot of poems by Pasolini, probably more than you would expect, and then he did actually release poetry books. It's probably the only director I can think in common that has poetry books as well as movies, and they don't really interlap, although there are poems still in some of my movies that I come up with. Like, I treasure those moments that I can still pull that poetry up. That I got a Guinness Book of World Record for most poetry ever written of all time. And I'm not saying anyone couldn't come up and challenge it, and I'm not saying my poetry is better than the guy I beat. It just means, sorry for the train noise, it just means we're at Annie Hall's, we're at Woody Allen's house in Annie Hall when he's a kid, and you always hear the train in the background, you know, that's the roller coaster going by, you know. I'm kidding. So we've talked plenty about myself. I feel like I'm giving another New York Drama Critic Circle review, thank you type thing, because they love all my work, and that I joined them and wrote a play, and there's so much more, but that I did want to thank Matt Glickstein, because he was a real help on getting me not just into the Americana of the fact that I'm writing about foreign things. I'm still an American who looks at these samurai things as though they're indestructible. So the first movie I want to talk about, and we'll have enough time to get to the second one, is a Godard movie, 2 or 3 things I know about her. And this is in the middle of the French New Wave, which starts in 1959 with Ellen René's Hiroshima Mon Amour. That Kenneth Anger was with Henry Langlois, like I had told you, in the Cinematheque, picking the movies to see for these new waivers that are coming up in Cahiers du Cinema and Positif on the left wing. Alan René's from Positif, and Godard and Truffaut were the right wing, you know, French new waivers that we're talking. Truffaut's like painting the auteur theory as though it's the dramaturge of the camera pen, that the camera's like a stylus, that we write with the camera, that it's verite, that we don't know how it's going to end until we film it, that we kind of do, though we kind of have it shaped out, and it's going to end the way it's end, and that's the way it ends. And one of the things about modernism that we've talked about is that the nostalgia is sometimes non-closure, not because these films are nostalgic and that's why they're non-closure, but because they capture moments from other types of movie, and that Godard references every movie from A to Z in all his movies. His goal is to reference movies. And that he references movies constantly all throughout his films. Seems postmodern, but it's actually, in his terms, used for nostalgia, because it's taken out in this abstract kind of cellular way that these modern scenes are about the human spirit, the human body, the human mind, and how they interact with their surroundings. And how they interact with their surroundings in a way that's repetitious, not of movies, but a whole new way to make a scene work based on how it worked before. And you'll see a lot of that in Pure Le Fou, My Life to Live. You know, one of the things that was sad, I lost a speech about My Life to Live, and I've got to tell you, I told you 100 times that scene where Anna Karina watches Renee Falconetti in Passion of St. Joan of Arc is the scene where she's like about to die. Like Joan of Arc says, I guess, then, do you know, the guards ask her, they're surrounding her in that impressionistic film. This time, no soundtrack, in a totally silent French film theater. Anna Karina is watching this Joan of Arc, and Joan of Arc's like, I guess it must be my death. It will lead to my death. Now, 2 or 3 things I know about her is a little more heavy but light at the same time, because My Life to Live is filmed like film noir, neo-noir, like it's got these shadings, these shots behind the head, and now we get all that with 2 or 3 things I know about her, but that it comes into this like classy, what Contempt was also doing, and that it's got some of those politics of the right, that the institution needs to be reordered or re-equalized for us all to detect what's actually going on with the politics in the movie, and that they shake up the movie is still a right-wing politic. I mean, I don't want to get into right or left, because in France, the right's not quite to our left, and the left there is far left, more left than our left. So you can't just say French politics are right-wing, because right-wing in France is still variably, although Godard and Truffaut claim almost an anarchy when they set about their freedom to free the camera, and like in Jules and Jim, it runs down that path and films them all running by, and the cameraman's running with the camera, but it's not a character, it's filming the other characters. And this point of view cam thing comes in, and all these techniques that are used in film noir, and all these techniques that in this case were used almost in musicals, or that is a cross between like a big business movie and a musical. Doesn't even imagine how it ties in. The same prostitution as My Life to Live is, and that's where the prostitute pays the pimp all her money, and the pimp gets all the money, and then the pimp runs off with the money and comes back to force the prostitute to get a job so they can get money, and it's this whole distorted view of of prostitution that actually is more realistic and does give too much away. You'll have to pardon me if I give too much away about the underside of selling yourself for making love, or however you want me to put it. And I know I cuss in some episodes and I tear through these movies at lightning pace, but we're not even close to getting into this because there's like a scene in this that's really memorable in Two or Three Things I Know About Her that really reminds me of that scene in Pure Le Fou where Anna Karina's like using the scissors to knock that guy out, but she crosses him this way, and next thing you know, the guy's like been psychoed on the table, and you're like, Anna Karina did that? But John Pelton does in the next room. Now in this one, it totally inviolates that idea with an even more random scene, and that there are random scenes all throughout Weekend by Godard is one I could talk about too. There's like the scene where these lovers sit in the dark and you can't see them in the dark, and they're talking about this really erotic stuff, like the way they do in the movie Persona in Weekend. It's like both movies are around the same time too. And the Weekend totally takes the challenge and goes to that road that's all traffic jammed, and it looks like a typical traffic jam in France, and that he's going around it is crazy because all the cars are pointed in all these directions, and Godard must have added huge amounts of artifice for this part of the story, the 7-minute long take, deep focus long take of this car going around other cars trying to stay on track with the camera even. It's kind of this self-reflexive, the camera's revealing itself kind of thing, and that's what they do in modernism. Like Two or Three Things I Know About Her always shakes up the modernism and puts it right in that anarchy, but that it's despairing illusions, isolation, despair, questions of mortality, existentialism. Is there an afterlife? Does the supernatural affect us? Is the supernatural superstitious? And we get all that in Two or Three Things I Noticed About Her, I Know About Her, which leads right into Le Chinois really as an epic, because all these early movies from Breathless, Godard's first of the French New Wave that really launched him, which has jump cuts galore, does all this draw attention to itself camera work, and showing these old classical films like John Belmondo's like this bogey character in Breathless. And one thing that's weird about Two or Three Things I Know About Her is that although there are main actors in it and they're main actresses that are once again in the prostitution film, this one is more abstract than you're typically going to expect, because it sounds like one of those easy Godard movies because it's in color, it's got beautiful women, it just takes you through moments of smoking cigarettes, and that's all we're going to do, and that would bring me to this next film, but I'm not going to talk about it quite yet. But Fallen Angels has a scene in it where the chick has to, it's almost at the very beginning of the film, and she has to smoke like an entire cigarette before she can get going. And it looks like these guys just ended up having sex and now they're having a cigarette. And that's kind of what's going on in here. But check this out. There's one nudity scene, and I don't really like nudity in movies, but she puts over this bag over her head, like this weird, like, shag bag, and it's got to say something political about feminism, because it's Two or Three Things I Know About Her, and one of those things is that if she's in France, she's probably a feminist. The second one is that she's probably an oppressed feminist because she's in France, and everybody knows the misogyny in France, as much as they've pointed out to everyone through their French ideology that misogyny must be equalized. They haven't really done it. They're totally, and at this time, Godard's being very breakthrough with all his actresses, especially Anna Karina, of bringing out this feminist side. And he's doing it not just by deconstructing your typical Hollywood film that he saw hundreds of, not just because of Henry Langlois and all those people putting together the movies they saw. Like Truffaut was getting the back orders. Kenneth Anger was there at the Cinematheque at a certain time making foreign films himself. So what I want to say about Two or Three Things I Know About Her is that all the jump cuts are memorable. All the things that go on are memorable. That it is kind of easy on the eye is weird because it's such these sharp colors. It's sharp colors, but the flow of the camera makes it easy on the eye. And I think it's kind of this critique on what brings us close to commercials and what we think is utility and objective, and how we objectify women by kind of inviting them into a commercial. That this film is in no way a commercial film is the total contradictory nature of Godard, because he's not selling this as a commercial, but he's using this kind of mindset that industry and big business and even technology is what sells but the beauty and the sex has to sell it too. And that they're not really selling anything but themselves makes it kind of this lesson on, if you want to become a prostitute, how are you going to sell yourself? And that they're totally underplaying everything and not really trying to bring men in, and are totally nonchalant and totally blasé, and having a scene with a cigarette that's like going to be later used in Fallen Angels, you know. But there's all these beautiful things about Two or Three Things I Know About Her. Really, it's one of those films that I can't express enough to just watch, because it's one of those Village Voice Top 100 films, you know, where they have like the Top 100 by Village Voice, and Two or Three Things I Know About Her is one of the four Godard movies that makes it, along with Pierre Le Fou, My Life to Live. They didn't put Alphaville in there. It wasn't Breathless Contempt. Contempt was the other one I'm getting. So Contempt is in the Village Voice Top 100 too, but the Two or Three Things I Know About Her and Contempt, we could go on for days, but we have gone on for days about Contempt. So now it's Two or Three Things I Know About Her is The Place in the Sun, because that is so abstract, that it's so chip-choppy about the editing, that it flies backwards and forward in time, that the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning, and it's so asynchronous, it's so diachronic, it's so out of sequence with itself, that it flies all over the place, and it's really hypnotic. So when you get hypnotized, it's like you start to forget the images, especially because there's no closure. And the closure is so ham-banging that it's almost like Masculine Feminine, where Jean-Pierre Léaud falls out of that window at the end, and he's just barely sitting there, and she's like, well, typing at the typewriter, well, I lost my best man again. You know, it's like, well, he just went over the typewriter, he's gone. You know, and like that's an ending, but this one has an even more random ending. I mean, that everyone gets gunned down in this is definitely a clue to that they all lived through it, and that it was like a killing moment, but like they had to have gangsterism, and somehow Pierre Le Fou made it impossible not to have movies before or after it gangster. Breathless is practically a gangster film, and trust me, if you don't think Godard's into gangsterism, then you just don't know the way he makes movies. Now, I had said something egotistical once about how I thought that I was as good as Godard. Let's erase that comment forever. Just what I mean is I direct in the way that he directs, although I'm not as good, and I can't even really limit myself by saying I direct as good as him, because I don't. I mean, Jean-Luc Godard is one of the legends of all time. You can't just take a legend spot and say, well, that's the one I could direct. Like, what I meant to say was I can use low budgets and usually be in the Godard vein, some more than others, but that there's 100 Godards ahead of me is because everyone wants to be Godard. And that we miss him, that we wish he was still with us, yes. That he's gone radical on politics and shaken us all, like with Le Chinois and Les Carabiners, is totally true. That he shook us down from 1960 to Weekend, and the cannibals in the woods eat the weekenders. And that's after they talk about weird shit in it together. At the end of the beginning of the movie, they're talking about weird perverted persona type stuff. At the end, they're eating each other like cannibal headhunters in the middle of the woods that are in an anarchist party that like to play the drums. That play the drums for about 30 minutes at the end, that you keep coming tracking shots that are really long, almost as long as the 7 minute of the traffic jam, but that you're in the woods now with these cannibal headhunters. Makes perfect sense, because it's your typical outing in France is going to end with you getting eaten by cannibal headhunters, and everybody knows that. But what I'm trying to get at is that, like, Godard really challenged the whole meaning of taking things to the unexpected level of experimentation, and that this is the hard film on memory to register, but you remember the whole thing when it's on, is only part of how it hypnotizes you, and that's a propaganda technique used against itself. By revealing what propaganda is, we've almost become entranced with the fact of knowing that it's propaganda, so then we get into it, and that what he's really selling isn't even prostitution. He's just taking a life of a prostitute and making it into a movie, and that's a famous thing in France to do, like with My Life to Live. And Godard was one of the premieres of that. Mother and the Whore was one of the things that did that, the prostitution. And there's Italian films like Hawks and the Sparrows, you know, where it gets all glorified as prostitution gets glorified, but that there's still giving their money to their pimps is not like a question of politics. It's a question of saying, this is the character of the film. This is how she lives. Judge her not because she's about to become your favorite character. That there are several in an ensemble is not what's known about 2 or 3 things about her. That it's way edgier than Le Chinois, I don't know, because Le Chinois has an actual let's go seek and down and destroy him, which this has, but in a much more comic book kind of Scarface from the 20s kind of way. Not the Scarface with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre that Oliver Stone and Brian De Palma did, which is a great Scarface. But the original Palm Muny Scarface has some kind of Gatling gun thing that there is in this movie, but that if you're looking for every version of this film, the Criterion version is your key. That this disc is about $30, $40 isn't bad. That this one's the DVD, that I'm sure they released the Blu-ray of 2 or 3 things. Actually, I can't tell you that for sure because I don't have my Criterion collection list out like I used to have every day. Gotta see this one, gotta buy this one. You gotta see them all. And that Netflix still plays Criterion movies, and Hulu plays Criterion movies, and the Criterion Channel plays Criterion movies. And I got to toot my own horn. I worked for Criterion, and I've Criterionized a movie like Mind Walk as a Criterion movie because of me, because my producer friends on LinkedIn gave me this movie, Mind Walk, and said I could just release it how I wanted. So I gave them a Criterion Paramount release, and that's how I work. But I am not ever going to say that I'm anywhere near like these big producers or big directors again, because I feel cursed that I even ever opened my big yap and said, yeah, I bet I can do as good as Godard, because that's stupid. You can't do as good as the master before you. Everything you've done, they've done 10 times more of, and they've gotten so confused by what movie was theirs because they've made so many. I mean, Godard was prolific. He made movies all throughout. Even we always say it ends with Weekend, but it doesn't end with Weekend. It ends with like Night Music, and who even knows Notre Musique, and who even knows if that was the last one, and if that even one came out, or if it didn't, who knows? Because foreign film markets are all over the place, and the video that killed the radio star, well, the internet killed the video star, because now you have to go out of your way on Amazon to buy something that's so rare like this, just to see it, just to prove that it's so abstract, that it gets you into this bliss and this genuine, sublime kind of way, and that the colors are so reflective of what they need to be, and that they're not so boastful of contempt, that those colors become this like kind of Spartacus layout, and these colors become like this modernist realism beyond even an exploitation film, into this kind of mode of like 60s, like we're not quite to the exploitation of Weekend, but we're going to take it right there to the feminist study of the female, even if she's trapped in the horror position like she is in so many movies, and so many movies have gone to that. And that there are even movies that are in the French New Wave, beyond Mother in the Horror, that there are movies even in other movements that are about prostitution, like Jean Dielman. Jean Dielman's a hard movie to explain, and I would have it here to explain, but Chantal Akerman, this really wonderful female director, has directed all these movies about the feminist cycle of, they're almost movies for women by women, it's like you watch these women at first want to be erotic, and then like you get Jean Dielman, who doesn't mind eroticism, but she's a prostitute, so she has to make a living, and it's to pay her kids' way through school, and it's just a typical realism. And that the shots are inveterately long isn't inveterate, because you love the fact that the shots are as long as Weekend in Jean Dielman. That Chantal Akerman shoots these big scenes, and I've seen her retrospectives, retribution that she's done for the female culture, and I love it. I think that Chantal Akerman is a class act, and I don't think she should be missed in terms of history. That we'll talk more about Jean Dielman, although I will tell you she has to get mad and get even with the guy that's trying to take advantage of her, and that she does take out a dude that gets even with her, comes after Abstract, her working in the house all this time, and that the colors here are more vibrant than Jean Dielman, which is kind of playing it down on the colors and kind of making what Scorsese's looking for, and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore with Jean Dielman, that they're around the same year, makes perfect sense. The Scorsese is on the level of all these Ackerman type directors, and he's got Kenneth Anger running through his veins. I mean, you can see these kind of things that Scorsese marvels Godard, and that he can direct a Godard picture better than me is obvious, and that Scorsese, again, like I said before, does one of these master classes. But this is like the master class where like someone that teaches you astronomy or someone, and I just happen to be teaching film criticism. See, as a critic, I have a worthy position where I can take over this class at Harvard and teach it and not offend Harvard because they don't have anyone else teaching film. And it's a master class, so of course, that YouTube's invited. And then the fact that COURSERA was asking me to be a professor means that what you're watching isn't a sham, right? But it doesn't mean that I have the opinions and knowledge of Martin Scorsese, who's already done a number of question and answers about films, knows about 10 times the amount of film as me, that I keep coming back to my favorite avant-garde, like 2 or 3 things I know about hers. Not even the downfall of why I couldn't. It's like comparing, I don't know, it's like that scene in freaking Third Man where they're up there in that roller coaster and they're looking down, and it isn't this bad, but like if you think about Scorsese, he'd be the guy up there saying, they all look like ants. So I'm not saying he's going to throw the guy out of the booth like they do in Third Man, but Follow Me, Carol Reed puts Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton on this high-rise Ferris wheel, and they get stuck at the top, and Orson Welles confesses that he's been using fake penicillin, and all of a sudden, that's not what reminded me of that. But when Orson Welles was about to throw them out and stuff, because they all look like ants down there, well, Scorsese would have to throw me out of the thing because they all look like I look like an ant compared to him. And I'm not just being humble and being ridiculously realistic, that what we would do at Masterclass isn't to take away from the other Masterclasses, it's totally to promote them. I totally promote that you go see Martin Scorsese's Masterclass. Everybody in these classes has a different talent. I'm pretty talented at film criticism. I can make it work at Harvard, USC, and CALARTS, 3 of the hardest places to get criticism going, but that I'm going to compare and contrast is the thing that's going to keep me going. That Martin Scorsese is 1,000 times greater than me. I'm not asking for a pardon. I'm just saying there's legends in our midst, and I'm not going to go ahead and say the ridiculous things like I can direct as good as Godard or Roger Corman or anybody else I'm stylizing after. That I can hold my own, yeah, as a director, writer, that I'm a good film critic, yeah, but there's things you got to rely on about the universe, and that is basically one of them is the infallibility of Martin Scorsese, that things have probably gone wrong behind the scenes, but that he has made it look like nothing went wrong because it's so perfectly interlocked with all these different scenes, and then he's totally getting these jump cut ideas and these fast forwards and trailers back from movies like 2 or 3 Things I Know About Her is a revelation. And this one is Fallen Angels, and it's Wong Kar-wai, and I said in a tag that you may have seen, but I had to lose that episode, and that we're doing good tonight. We've got a little ways to go, but I want to tell you it's worth it to stay here, because Fallen Angels by Wong Kar-wai is this interesting movie that cuts from black and white to color. Wong Kar-wai started with Tears Go By, and so another movie that I can't remember, but he made Happy Together, In the Mood for Love, Ashes of Time, and then I left a really good Ashes of Time for some magazines review. It's good, but I'm going to tell you Ashes of Time is one of the best swordplay movies of flying swordsmen that actually has this whole airbender quality, because it takes the water off the ground, and it's like even better than moving water with your mind, like in Way of Water. It's like Ashes of Time has this whole thing where like a horse disappears in a waterfall, that they're doing this samurai type stuff in a Hong Kong film, but it's all kung fu anyway. And then Wong Kar-wai is beautiful in this kind of storybook telling of an epic film with Ashes of Time. And In the Mood for Love gets you this whole picture that's done almost classical Hollywood cinema of this guy and this lady that are in love with each other, and they're Asian, and they think of each other constantly, and they don't do it to see how that affects them. But I don't know if that's just a technique to drive the audience into suspense as to whether the guy and the girl are ever going to hook up, which they don't. And they go against their better judgment because both of their partners are cheating on them, but they decide to stay true to their partners anyway and don't end up making love, and that's what makes them the greatest lovers of all time. And it's like not even repressing to the point of explosion. They never explode. They just keep repressing and repressing and repressing, and it's that like S&M quality of never getting together that totally fuels their fire, and that they regret it so much that they just want to make out again, and that they make out even at all, and the film drives me wild. But this is the one that's the postmodernist one, like Chungking Express, and that it's part of the same trilogies in the Mood for Love and Chunking Express and Fallen Angels was kind of because Quentin Tarantino labeled these as a trilogy. And I think that it's important to note that Quentin Tarantino did, in fact, executive produce the American release of Chungking Express by Wong Kar-wai, and did, in fact, launch the whole series that would have him go up to where he is now, with like Grand Masters. Nonetheless, it's not even his most recent film, and that I'm a little behind on his filmography, but have scoped everyone up to Grandmasters from As Tears Go By and those films that came first. The Fallen Angels is interesting, like I said, because it goes from color to black and white, and I think the whole shift is one of the things that makes it Godardian, but even more extreme in avant-garde experimentation affecting film. But that this is postmodern, it's still related to Godard's idea of pastiching everything, of using everything from other films intertextually, from the day the zoetrope and Magic Lantern was born all the way to the day of the digital camera, that they're using film cameras in Fallen Angels because it's still the 90s. This is the kind of movie that the 90s are talking about. Pulp Fiction, Fallen Angels, those are the movies of the 90s. Goodfellas, Scorsese. And that those movies of the 90s take on such experimentation to rule out how they're going to make the film means that you can make a film as classically repressed as you want In the Mood for Love to be, without really objectifying the female, because you're totally feeling from a female side as well as the males in The Mood for Love, and you're totally hoping this couple hooks up. You're praying to Buddha that this couple hooks up, and they just don't, and sparks are flying anyway, and you're like, this is wild. But in Fallen Angels, everybody hooks up with everybody. Dude, some of the best sex scenes of a movie are in this film, and I don't really watch films just for the sex, but if you wanted to watch a good sex scene in a movie, check this out, because the guy and the chick were going after it and they're on the bed, and yeah, it's wild, dude. And you just think, am I embarrassed to talk about that? Not really, because it's part of the stylization of the film to shoot these clips super fast in these different montages and get all the action in, that it becomes this whole aesthetic event. It's an aesthetic event. It's everything the myth of total cinema said would go beyond the myth of total cinema. Then when it starts breaking down and contextualizing the myth of total cinema, that is where we find conflict resolution meet never resolving, and that's an ending for you because the conflict resolution's there and there's no conflict resolution. Part of that's because there's multiple stories with these different Asian actors, and that they're all incredible actors is not even begin to list how important this movie Fallen Angels really is, and that it is a big budget, maybe not a Hollywood budget, but is practically a Hollywood budget, maybe more in Hong Kong money, is because they love their Yakuza movies in Hong Kong. And I know I said that Ashes in Time was kind of Yakuza, but this is not even like a Yakuza sword, but like the Yakuza genre where they use the gun like the sword, and they kind of do that with Les Samurai, which isn't an Asian film. It's a French film by Jean-Pierre Melville, and it's in the French New Wave, and it's right around the time that Weekend came out in 1967. And it's like a Yakuza film, and that there's a film by Paul Schrader called The Yakuza, further highlights how the word Yakuza isn't always listed as some kind of Yakuza sword like it is in Ashes and Diamonds. It's the gun like it is in Ashes and Diamonds and Fallen Angels, and that there's tons of gunplay, and people get taken out by guns, and main characters fall and main characters rise. And that there's a scene where they have to eat a bucket of ice cream before it melts because they're robbed at gunpoint from their ice cream. Doesn't mean the people running the ice cream booth really had to force down that much ice cream, but it looks like when they were making that scene in the movie that they all had to eat so much ice cream they were freaking out. And that's a hilarious gesture, that there's some kind of Marx Brothers gesture in the middle of the film that they suddenly got to steal and eat all the ice cream is about as riotous as is at first. When he's making those scenes, it looks good to eat the ice cream, but then they're also stuffed on it. Even you are going, wow, I don't think I could have eaten that much ice cream. So it's this whole, sounds like almost a kid's movie at that point. There's kids eating the ice cream. It's kind of funny because the film is totally stiff R. I mean, it has cuss words all throughout it's in subtitles. And by now, if you're watching these subtitled films and enjoying these subtitled films, I know some people don't like to have to read the subtitles, but I guarantee you, after about watching 10 foreign films, you'll never realize that you're not taking your eyes off the main event and still absorbing the subtitles. It takes about 10, maybe 15 sometimes, foreign films, but eventually you break and you're reading the subtitles and watching the movie at the same time, and you're not worried about the fact that you're watching a foreign film anymore because you're absorbing the message so fast that it sounds like they're saying it in English just from how fast the subtitles are going and how easy it is to keep track of that when you've broken down into a lot of films that this is a good foreign film to start on because of its expressive stylization, its technological stylization, and the mode of the Hong Kong cinema Yakuza gun movie, right? We have to confess that in the Paul Schrader version of the Yakuza, we're talking about guns, swords, and guns. That in some movie the swords are absent and they still call it Yakuza kind of has a blend to a criticism that might be rejected in a way. Because the Yakuza sounds more like the Mafia from Hong Kong, if I'm not mistaken. So then we have gunplay, and now where's the sword? But that we remember that blades of the Yakuza are kind of traditional, so that the gangsters had swords at some point. It's kind of what we're revealed to in Ashes of Time, and that's why Ashes of Time is an interesting film, because it actually has the sword play that some of the Yakuza blade, like the Yakuza blade in Pulp Fiction that Bruce Willis grabs off the shelf. What he does with it, I don't remember. No, I'm kidding. He goes in and saves Marcellus Wallace, and the whole scene is so controversial because who put who under, and that Pulp Fiction is all about who put who under, and you can't piece it together because even if you try, it spins you around backwards to be front, and you can't re-edit Pulp Fiction back together, though I've done it. I can't re-edit 2 or 3 things I know about her back together because it's edited so wildly disparate that there's no way to try and copy that because you wouldn't know where to put the film splice at all. That Fallen Angels does a certain type of methodical cutting that's almost elemental to the syntagmatique as a bracket syntam. That is, it takes in all the episodic qualities and matches them to music while parallel cutting through a scenography of these star-crossed lives that are also some of the characters from Chungking Express. Now that In the Mood for Love comes in the Fallen Angels Chungking Express body of work trilogy, doesn't seem to be interesting that Chungking Express and Fallen Angels both are way more similar than In the Mood for Love, which is this total gluttony piece about how we're going to gluttonize never making love with the one we want to most. In a way, In the Mood for Love, to me, is tragic, because if I loved someone, and I really loved someone, it would be someone that loved me too. It wouldn't just so that they love each other, they do. But I would want to have everything from them, and they would want everything from me if they were in love, right? But in this particular case, they're holding on to some nostalgic tradition, that they're doing it in an overflowing postmodern way. It's totally reckless, and I love the recklessness of Fallen Angels even more, and Chungking Express even more, and In the Mood for Love is so reckless in its pullback, repressive mode. But that, we feel like it's going to snap, like Taxi Driver gets all repressed and then explodes. But like that, In the Mood for Love gets repressed, and we end with repression, leaves us all thinking, oh, they must have done it like the next week. They flew in planes and got back with each other and had this magnificent sex, and we have. But in most movies, we're like, maybe they shouldn't be getting nude in front of the camera. We get a little agitated by the sex work and Eyes Wide Shut with the Illuminati having sex and everything. There are scenes in movies that are appropriate for what they are, but they're vilifying it some. And you won't see it vilified in Fallen Angels that the sexual act is not some bombardment of the modern unit to critique everything that went wrong with the universe, which is something In the Mood for Love treads on, by the way. Not in a sadistic kind of way, but think about it. If In the Mood for Love is pulling us back from the closure we all want, and we all love it, that means they didn't even need to have sex. They probably gave each other orgasms by just looking at each other. But Fallen Angels, on the other hand, has this whole nonstop pace where these beautiful actresses and beautiful actors, not in some kind of way to sell sex or anything, but to sell the total expressionist stylization, that everything's right out in the open, that every human emotion is being displayed in this rapid fire cutting. And I love the rapid fire cutting here, because In the Mood for Love has some long takes, right? But Chungking Express and Fallen Angels are totally smashed with edits, and that they're out of sequence a little bit is totally true, and that you're going to run into out of sequence moments in a lot of Wong Kar-wai's films, even if they're flashbacks or flash forwards, some of his films are like almost to the level of Two or Three Things I Know About Her, like Happy Together, the movie about the homosexuals that are in a film by Wong Kar-wai where they're in love with each other, and that film cuts so rapid fire and out of sequence in his time travel movie 2024, which, by the way, welcome to 2024, everybody. If that's the name of Wong Kar-wai's movie, I don't know, but I thought it was called 2024, and then it came out a long time ago. It means we're all still wondering what happened after Grand Masters to Wong Kar-wai, which is really why we need to go to his filmography and check it out, because there's some As Tears Gone By, and there's some really good stuff. And I don't want you to miss Ashes of Time. I don't want you to shy away from a foreign film just because it's Asian in Hong Kong and it seems like it's going to be some kind of cheesy movie. But if you look at it, it doesn't really look cheesy. That she already looks like Irma Vep, who I did a piece on in another film today. And then we've got this guy, and I think that's Tony Leung, but it could be Tony Leung. But it's Wong Kar-wai. Oh, hang on. It's Leon Lei Ming and Takeshi Kanishiro. Sorry, I had the names all wrong. It wasn't Tony Leung. That was Leon Lei Ming and Michelle Reese. I mean, there's more characters than I've even listed of this cast, and I love this cover because you know you're getting into trouble when it's saying things on the back like how experimental it is and how, you know, it says go for broke visual bravura. That's what Kevin Thomas the LA Times said. And Kevin Thomas is a quality critic, and that there's Stephen Talty, Time Out New York. And he's probably one of the most important critics because Time Out New York is an incredibly powerful read, and that the Los Angeles Times of New York is agreeing on it, shows that this international film has spread from the East Coast to the West Coast of America in the market. That I'm sitting in here with Colorado with all these rare films is because I'm a rare film obsession. I obsess after rare films, and I still don't have a few that I did have at one time, and I don't have a few that can even be tracked down. It's like, did Celine and Julie Go Boating ever come out on Blu-ray or DVD? I think it did. Did the Criterion release Celine and Julie? See, I used to have the Criterion so down that I could kind of pedal through the site and get as many films in that I got stuck in the 30s watching 100 films from the 1930s, and most of them were Ozu films. You know, no, I'm kidding. He only did about 8 silent films in that period. Well, maybe 9 or 10, but the thing is that you're so focused in one genre if you're doing Criterion because you're trying to get through the whole thing. So I need to relax about the Celine and Julie Go Boating thing. But that movie is so important to film contextuality, and that I have it on VHS, and it's rare, expensive VHS isn't even the point. That Celine and Julie Go Boating is one of the movies that inspired even Two or Three Things I Know About Her, and it was after it came out, Two or Three Things I Know About Her inspired Celine and Julie Go Boating. And you may think I had an accident of what I said, but that Jacques Rivette was making that movie for like 7 years means it came right off of this one, and that in that one, they eat magic candy and see what they see. It's the women's subject and the movie they're watching with them in it is objective. That's why they're objects to their own subjectivity, which is a total Laura Mulvey push on why Celine and Julie Go Boating is excellent. Because Celine and Julie are the subjects. That they get into each other, that they do it a few times, that they're fun with that they eat magic candy and it sends them into this realm where they see themselves in a docudrama, one of those teleplay TV narratives that looks like TV but isn't even French TV, is still French traditional quality, and that they, in their own way, are objecting themselves is a breakdown of how the gaze usually eliminates the female gaze because it takes the man's eyes and reflects the camera on his point of view when you turn around, and if it's a woman, she's objectified. But that Celine and Julie kind of get objectified in their own way totally makes sense because their subject-object positioning is them watching themselves in this kind of movie thing that they're kind of trapped in, and it's just total auteur theory. Here we go. Jacques Rivette's going to get added to the auteur theory, but that's not even what he's going for, but that it's obvious that that's what it is Celine and Julie Go Boating. Now, that I don't know if it's been released to Blu-ray or DVD, I strongly urge whoever is in charge of that franchise to release it on some kind of newer form, and it would be a great print to restore. And if I had to suggest to even the Library of Congress a film to restore, and I know we mostly do American restoration, so UCLA could do it or something, but a Celine and Julie print all the way through. It's 4.5 hours or 3.5 hours, depending on the cut you have. It's close to 4 hours. And if they came out with that, then it's not so I could just hold it on the box and show it to you or be all vain that I'm the only one that's seen it or anything. I think we need to spread that movie to filmmakers to show them how to make a film, because that's the kind of film that shows you how to make a film. That when they're on the Magic Candy, they're watching a film. What is more amazing than someone watching a film with them in it, controlling it with their mind, not even trying to, because someone gave them this magic candy and they were in love with each other and they wanted to be in some dramaturge that's not really a movie but kind of is, and that they're spying on themselves, keeps coming back to like these inserts. You know how in Princess Bride, when Peter Falk, the great Peter Falk's reading the book, and it keeps coming back every once in a while to him reading the book, and it cuts back to him. Well, that's what they do in Celine and Julie Go Boating, only they're in the movie they're watching. The Princess Bride's reading a book, and that's the movie that we're watching. It means that Celine and Julie are watching the movie we're watching, but they're also watching the movie about themselves, which in a real weird way is saying, this isn't the real us. Like, it's us, but we're acting, and we can't change the acting unless we keep reordering the scene. And it's totally showing you how to be a director, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Jack Revette's so eccentric, like these Ellen Renee types, that they make these movies that are even longer than ever. And some would say an artist like Jack Revette has directed the longest movie is something we've gotten into in the past, that the longest movie is probably The Searchers, when it's all added into a 5-year existentialist avant-garde movie version of it that takes 5 years to play across. The pictures aren't going fast enough for it to really be a projection of a succession of images. That we said automated projection of succession of images leads me back to say, like, Ken Burns documentaries are the longest movie, or is it Out 27 by Jack Revette? Could anyone raise their hand if they've heard of Out 27? Now, that I don't know that it's Jacques Revette is only because I know that other directors have made movies that were long in the French New Wave, that Mother and the Whore, again, is 8 hours long, or 12 hours long, actually. There's a version that was 12 hours long. I only saw so many hours of it, when it was available on YouTube for a short time. Don't tell anyone that was available on YouTube. And we like to thank YouTube. Thank YouTube MASTERCLASS. Thank YouTube altogether, and YouTube creators, and giving us this space to talk about movies and film criticism. And we're not usurping any power here or taking away from the other masterclasses. We're just building a way so COURSERA can give you credit. And we especially wanted that credit to count at Harvard, because they have no film school. But that all these film places could work together and keep these film schools going is important, because we have to eventually enlist in more staff. And I don't know who's willing to do it freelance, because it's hard for me to do freelance, because then you have to go back through the show and wait for it to boil down to whether or not they're accepting this version of the show. And there's no reason not to accept it, because there's no nudity, there's no violence. But that we allude to that in cinema is already controversial, because who's going to see what image and take it out of context about what we're talking about? That we're talking about pure aesthetics is why I bring up modernism and Fallen Angels, because there's attention drawn to itself by the way it's edited and the way it jump cuts and the way 2 or 3 things jump cuts. There's an attention drawing respectability to it, that it's showing us how the director wants to compose this world of montage, and that these movies rely heavily on montage, though there's a few long takes of Godard ginormity in that movie, 2 or 3 things I know about her. That the aesthetics are what's drawn to the forefront, and that's what expressive stylization and modernism really is. Not just self-reflexive, but self-enjoyment of the fact that it's bringing you closer to what makes up an aesthetic of a movie: editing, production design, sound design, visual design, mise-en-scène, montage. We've talked about montage being editing and mise-en-scène being production design. Even further than the set goes on the shot, we think of a production designer, though it's working with a sound designer so we can hear and kind of guess what's in off-screen space. That you draw attention to all these filmmaking conventions and be like shooting down the idea of an American fireman going up a ladder at the same pace as the next one. You chop it back together to the way it was in the primitive era, but now it's totally constitutionally modern, because you're in the modern era using primitive technique. Like, you could even go back to Méliès and see how Méliès influenced the formalist camp with montage. And you can go back to like Vincent Minnelli making these long takes, gorgeous, and these Meet Me in St. Louis films that are taking these big paintings and making them come to life. And if you don't think classical Hollywood cinema is already geared to be eccentric and draw attention to itself, wait till you get a hold of Fallen Angels, because you'll actually learn, like you did with 2 or 3 things about her from Fallen Angels, how to make a movie. And that modernist films teach you how to make a movie is something we forget about: self-reflexiveness, about showing yourself making the movie or being part of the movie that you're showing yourself to. So that you're showing the movie as it's going on and saying, draw attention to this, change to black and white, draw attention to this. It's a Wurlitzer. Now, she's going to dance in front of the Wurlitzer and she's going to look sexy as possible, almost like a commercial film, maybe even beyond commercial film. Maybe in Hong Kong, we're so hyper commercial that the commercial is better than the movie. I don't know. But the point is that like it's all chippy chopped in all these ways that are throwback to other directors and auteurs and moments they've seen, especially Godard and all these breakthrough Godardian ways of changing a film. And then we see that it's already going on in Godard, even at the deep focus, long take level of contempt. And then we all see, which is about the making of a movie, and we all see these movies, even these gun Yakuza movies that are charming back to the other Yakuza movies and totally taking advantage that they're the best ones, is not just a critique of modernism, but it's also the style of expressivism, that we show what we want, that's our style, that's our directing, and that we're constantly showing people how to direct a movie just by making the movie. And you can study the film repeatedly, and there's some of the tricks you can't figure out how to recreate because it's still inimitable. But if you're trying to pull off these secrets, you're on the right track, because you may make a mess of things, but that it's going to look, even reference Fallen Angels is like referencing, having a romantic movie, even a reference in The Mood for Love. You're already going to be a lot better off with your fear and trembling towards the market of film directing. And that I think these film directors, Godard and Wong Kar-wai, don't get enough credit, because I've tried to make a film like that and I had success with it, but I didn't make it as good as them, is just to say, not to be forced humbly, but to say that those filmmakers were at it for a long time, and even when they broke through with their first few films, they were already in a style above the rest. I would have to say my film teaches a little bit how to make a film, yes, but it doesn't teach it as importantly to the context that postmodernism can be for the sake of itself. That these movies are for the sake of themselves, don't get me wrong, they are. That they're seeing how far you can push the limits of film, yes, they do. But that they still reveal a way to make a movie, is saying they're not just about cinema, but the process of making it, which is totally modern. And then we see in the postmodern era, we don't need a reason. We can show films being made by films, but it's not necessarily to draw attention to how to make a film, although it could show that. Now in that contextualized agenda, it's an empty commercial just saying, we know how to make films, this is how we make films, and we're going to keep doing it that way. But that Fallen Angels does fall under that postmodern category, although it still has the modernist, I'll show you how to do things that are creative in a self-reflexive way. I'll show you how to make an artwork by making an artwork, is so pronounced in these movies that the modern era or postmodern era, when cinema is for the sake of itself, watch and see if it teaches you how to be for the sake of itself. See if a movie can actually be for the sake of itself, that it's drawing attention to itself is fine, that it's commercial is fine, that these movies are kind of off commercial, but they're still available somewhere is fine. But that these postmodern films, cinema for the sake of cinema, and even 2 or 3 things I know about her, even going back to like Intolerance or Cabaret of the silent era, Griffith and Giovanni Pastrone, in the case of Cabaret, are already reckless, ballsy, wild, modern masterpieces that are already giving you the shakes, that they're so into themselves as movies, that they're going to ego trip it all the way through. And that's what it kind of is like to be filmed for the sake of film, because you know you're making such a damn good movie that you can just keep making it, and it's just going to keep getting more amazing. And that's when you know you've hit your stride. That my movies are good, but on this level of amazing, I had to cut myself off from saying that I'm as good as Godard, because I'm not. And that Godard would want me to say, I'm getting as good as him. Maybe not, he wouldn't. That he understood that he was on a higher level, yeah, but that he wouldn't really beckon to people that were Godardian in the way that Tarantino doesn't mind they don't mind that people are imitating their style, that they all recognize they're not as good as them, doesn't mean they mind recognizing their style. And I'm not even like one of those directors that I'm always doing Godard, so I'm not really saying that I'm the Godardian one. But that Wong Kar-wai takes the same Godard language and mixes it up and smashes it up and does this with it and that with it and ties it into aesthetic notions of where to place the angle of the camera next to an invariably contrasting angle and still have the movement connect but still jump cut. And I'm not going to talk about just all the movies that Godard compelled for America to make or who did what, like Godardian. But I can no longer say, and I know I've pushed this point enough, but I can no longer say that I am somehow that good, because that everybody that's Godardian, everybody that's Tarantinoian does Tarantino type stuff, already does Godard stuff. And people that do Tarantino stuff, strangely enough, usually get produced by Tarantino. That he grew alongside Wong Kar-wai kind of at the same time is really interesting. That he helped his career by promoting it is really cool. And that we have Chungking Express releasing all the rest of Wong Kar-wai's films eventually to Netflix is so badass of Tarantino to get Wong Kar-wai on the level that here we go again. Now Tarantino's like this inevitable film critic, and he would do a better job at film criticism than me, as he's shown in his old shows. And I keep mentioning the one where he was talking about how to use a remote, and you think he's joking, but he actually shows how to use contrast and brightness on a remote with different movies and have them look different ways. That's all the time I have for today. We got to wrap things up. That was a good masterclass, and I think we, looked at the Magic Lantern Zoetrope as being these experimental tools that eventually led to classical hibernation, but that these tools were reused in ways that had never seen before to become more of a modern cinema, is to bring attention to itself. That way you can see how to make a movie, regardless of the director's whole point was to see how to make a movie, but to draw attention to themselves. They show some of their tricks right off the bat in postmodernism, saying, we love showing our tricks. We're going to do way more that are going to blow you away. And 2 or 3 things I know about her is calling attention to all these moments of these females that are stuck in prostitution, that don't understand why the radio is so loud, that don't understand these political things that are going on, but kind of do, and are actually the ones listening to the political anarchy station. And there's some kind of faster pussycat kill mode that leads to Weekend. And 2 or 3 things I know about her, with them be kind of becoming fatalistic, as some Godard female prostitutes do. And again, we're out of time. So I love you all. We'll meet at YouTube Masterclass in a few days. Give it time to simmer down. And just think, you're halfway through the semester. There's no midterm. The final's going to be hard, but I think I'll give a few tricks to get through it. But anyway, it's way off. We got 6 more hours of this, so the final's not coming for a while, so relax. Watch as many of these movies as you can. I'm not going to order you to watch all the 75, 78 movies we've showed off in this whole thing, and that some of the 20-minute clips are just me getting, semester 1, are me getting into the scheme of things. But these longer clips are the actual masterclass that we teach for Harvard, USC, CalArts, with our CalArts PhD and our comparative lit PhD. And we ask you just to remember that, like me, having been awarded, almost by proxy of having been a writer this whole time, still doesn't steal anyone's thunder of even like Sam Fuller, who's got this kind of outwards agenda, and he's not really figuring out what he means by anything, and that he's kind of going modern and showing how it works, and before everybody and around the same time in the new wave, Samuel Fuller's going, and no way could I ever call myself as good as Samuel Fuller. So to just think that he's one of the less directors I think of right away, but that he's one of the first in the same sense as how auteurs work. Because auteurs are so genuine that none of them are better than each other. They're just all amazingly great at their own thing to devise their own court of what things look like in their political psychological scheme, as well as especially their aesthetic stylization that can be very expressive and self-reflexive and nostalgic and full of pastiche, which is empty parody, which is clips from other movies in your own film, reenacted in your own film. Celine and Julie, go boating. We'll see you next time.